This is episode number 200 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. Welcome, Wally Drangmeister. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Sorry, I bought a new laptop, Wally, and I was transposing.
Totally stepped on my one line. The only line I'm assured of getting the whole show, and you stepped on it. That's fine, Paul. So great to be here for episode 200.
Yeah, and a new laptop, of course. I got a Mac, and now my PC died, so I was trying to transcribe the introduction of the podcast from tippingpointnm.com. You can find all the episodes right there. And, of course, we are live and in person if you're listening to this or watching it on Labor Day, Monday. So, it's not a happy Memorial Day kind of thing. It's a blessed Memorial Day, thinking about all the soldiers that have died in battle over the many decades of American history. But we are live and in person.
Yeah, Labor Day Memorial Day is a very somber and humbling holiday when you think about all that's happened from a military point to our country. The Revolutionary War. I'll skip a few. I won't name them all, but World War I is incredible. Vietnam, World War II, Korea. Just a lot of things happened militarily that has helped make our country what it is today, which is a free place, but there's a...
More or less.
Yeah, more. Well, yeah. What do they say? All enemies, foreign and domestic. We seem like we're doing very well from the foreign enemies, although there's a bit of influence trying to be peddled from places like China and Russia. But, internally, we maybe are... punting away some of the liberties that we've been taking for granted for the last 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and of course, 200. So we have done, amazingly, Wally, now 200 episodes of the Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. Hard to believe.
Yeah, really, 2 a week with a couple of exceptions every now and then. Christmas, New Year, a few times there's just one. So divide that by 2, going on 2 years and going strong. And thank you to everyone who listens, everyone who comments, and lets the Rio Grande Foundation know what they think. It's great to hear your feedback, but I'm very humbled to be part of something that's gone on for 200 episodes and has a wide, diverse following like this show does.
Yeah, so as usual, a lot's been going on this week as we make our way through the COVID-19 situation here in New Mexico. The most notable news of all the many news items is the fact that Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has put a date on when we're going to have the special session, June the 18th. So more or less 3.5 weeks to go before that. And despite some of the budget figures and the deficit that we're looking at, Michelle Lujan Grisham said, and I quote in the Albuquerque Journal on Thursday, May the 21st, "We're in a pretty good position where I don't anticipate we'll have to make deep cuts." Now, the Albuquerque Journal, as has been so often the case throughout this crisis, had spot-on editorial cartoon by John Trevor and editorial in the Sunday paper, really taking the governor to task, I think, for this hubris, if you will, in terms of her approach to the budget. But it kind of reflects where I think we've been all along, which is that the governor's going to minimize the pain pre-November, and then we're going to have an actual realistic conversation about New Mexico's economy and budget, realistic as it'll get, after November. And moving forward, I mean, if she goes through all this $1.7 billion in reserves and the federal stimulus money that comes through, it goes away very, very quickly. But I think she's inclined to try to minimize the situation throughout November and not, try to win election that way.
Well, New Mexico is such a government heavy state. We talk a lot about the government more than even the private sector, but I just want to start at the private sector. It is hurting bad.
Mm-hmm.
Oil and gas, and I know we'll talk more in this podcast about the long-term prospects, or at least the short and mid-term prospects for recovery in that. Small businesses, one of the largest payers of gross receipts tax, they are hurting. Unemployment is just out of control. People are having a tough time getting their unemployment checks to even get a little bit of relief in the meantime. But the state has some advantages that counties and municipalities do not, and that is they have reserves. They have funds that are kind of lying around. And, the one that was really the bellwether for me, the canary in the mine shaft, was Santa Fe. Santa Fe's taking very aggressive early action to say, we've got a situation here. They're very tourism dependent, as is much of the state. I saw a thing the other day, 15% occupancy in their hotels. That's nothing. Normally it'd be, 70, 80, 90% this time of year. So even if the state is able to defer its pain, maybe its price of deferring its pain is mitigated a bit because they do have reserves, they do have some other things, and to a not complete extent, but to a large extent, they'll be the ones that decide where the federal funds go that come into the state. Now, some will go directly to the city of Albuquerque, but the state is in a position to control a lot of that. But believe me, are more hands and more hands out than the state of New Mexico, much less the federal government, could ever take care of in the short term with what's happened to our economy here in New Mexico and across the U.S. for that matter.
That is very true. And it's worth clarifying, of course, that the governor's not up for election this fall. It's the legislature, and she's looking to maintain Democrat majority, not only maintain, potentially expand it, not just expanding it numerically, but bringing in new progressives that are more in line with her way of thinking than the more moderate Democrats. We'll see how things go, but it is very interesting and surprising, I think, to see the governor kind of taking this position of everything's okay and we're going to make our way through it. I thought she would do that. I just didn't think she would be so early in terms of that's her approach. Normally, I would think she would make a few cosmetic trims around the edges and then just ride out the storm. But she's really done next to nothing to address the budget situation. So,
well, and I don't have a specific movie, but just a generic movie meme that comes to mind is the remain calm, all is well, while whoever is speaking that in a movie is run over by the crowd. And so this, it's one of those, I hope she's right. I hope things recover very quickly, but I'm not so sure that is the case. And you have to wonder, the people that did the modeling on the spread and the approach to coronavirus and COVID-19, are they the same people that are doing the estimates with regard to the recovery? So, there's models, and if you put incorrect or bad assumptions into a model, you'll get a bad outcome. So it will be very interesting to see what the agenda is and what actually gets done here in the middle part of June in New Mexico.
Yeah, so New Mexico In Depth had a story basically reflecting this as well, saying the public schools could avert deep cuts in June. That's, of course, when the special session will be. That was from Sean Griswold. We're looking at stories from the Wall Street Journal. Coronavirus threatens to hobble U.S. shale oil boom for years. And, of course, New Mexico has been among the states that's disproportionately benefited from that. There's a lot of numbers in there, but it talks about how the U.S. became the world's top producer of oil, and that was driven by the shale oil boom. Now, it's worth getting a little technical in this issue because shale oil is unique relative to just a field of oil way under the ground in that it starts off very strong and then very quickly drops off. So as we see these wells not being drilled and the wells that exist just keep going, their production is going to drop very, very quickly. Now, in a sense, that might be good for the long-term price in the Permian Basin because rapid declines in production will take oil off the market, and then the price will drive back up. But this is the article in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal, and I think they're right, it's hard to tell. There are so many people out there who have been criticizing the shale oil market and the producers for using a lot of debt, trying to patch their businesses together in the good times with, being leveraged and variety of business practices that I think a lot of people would say that wasn't necessarily the best way to do things, not sustainable in the long term. And, when you're in that situation, piecing together things with chewing gum and baling wire in the good days, the sign of a bad time is going to really hit your business very hard. And that's, to summarize, that is the business. Basically saying that because of this, the debt situation and the future non-availability, like once bitten, twice shy, people that lended money to these shale producers are not going to be inclined to be so free and easy with their credit in the future. And that is going to, maybe not permanently, but for the foreseeable future, tamp down U.S. crude production because the main people driving that boom are not going to be able to get the kind of loans and money they need to invest to bring on new production over and over again. So it's coronavirus threatens to hobble the U.S. shale oil boom for years. Wall Street Journal, May 24th, and fascinating article, definitely relevant to New Mexico.
Well, I definitely, there's no doubt about it that there's certain sectors of the oil industry when things are going pretty good, they were able to borrow lots of money at very low interest rates, and as long as things go well, that's always a good model. It doesn't matter what the industry is. If you can borrow money cheaply and you're growing and you're going quickly and your market and your margins are solid, things are good. Well, when there's a slowdown, or in this case, a almost come to a screeching halt, debt is your enemy. So it's the companies that have more equity, more cash reserves. And while I agree with that, I also know that what happens inevitably during these times is those that do have equity and do have cash on their balance sheet are able to buy properties up from those that are heavily in debt, either right before bankruptcy or out of bankruptcy in some cases. So I don't think oil is going to go away, but yeah, I don't think there's any question that, for the next few months, and man, I'll be so bold to say for the next year, I don't expect oil prices to just go sky high, but we've seen time and time again. Okay, so now we're to the point where, when oil was 140, it will never be low again. Well, now we're starting to hear the oil will never go up again. Well, you shut off a lot of production in the Permian Basin. It's tough to get financing for new projects, except the most strong balance sheet companies out there. The folks in Russia and the Middle East decide to cut back on production a little bit. Is it impossible that we would see $40, $50, $60, $70, $80 oil in the next year? I don't think it's necessarily likely, but it's far from impossible. And if one thing following the oil industry pretty closely for the last 15 years that I've done is that it is a volatile market. And whatever you think's going to happen, you may be right, but man, there's been a lot of surprises, and they seem like they're coming every few years. There's a huge surprise. So I'm going to put it out there, Paul, within 2 years, we'll see oil prices higher than we ever dreamed at this date. So I will make a note and put it in
I'm going to need a number. I'm going to need a specific number.
$75 a barrel within 2 years.
All right. So I'm going to read you a quote. So according to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. production was 13 million barrels a day at kind of its peak pre-crisis. And Daniel Yergin, who I consider to be the foremost expert in the oil market and more market of this product, 9 million barrels a day by next summer. That's when he sees the ultimate trough here is coming next summer.
From a production point of view.
Production.
Yeah. So then what is the price at that point, in the following year, and where does it go? Because despite what a lot of people act like that this is the end of oil, have we hit peak oil? I don't know. It's one of those, am I ignorant or apathetic? I don't know, and I don't care. But we will use significant oil as an economy in the United States and the world for the coming, I don't think I'm too bold to say 3 decades, but 1 decade, there's nothing else there. Shipping across the oceans, airlines, there's a few technologies out there that maybe have some potential, but they're a long way away. And we are not going to deindustrialize anytime soon, and that means oil is going to play a big part of the mix.
And of course, for New Mexico to do well with its budget, it requires prices being high is obviously huge, because prices will in some respects drive the production. We know we have the resources here now in New Mexico to produce at significantly higher levels. Now, maybe that price is no longer 40. Before the crisis, the break-even point was considered to be around 40. Maybe that price is 50 or 55 or 60 now. But that is kind of the to say it's the $10 million question is an understatement, because we're dealing with bigger piles of money. But ultimately, what price point is it that is really required based on the new financing models, based on the new realities in the marketplace, to get things really moving? Right now, I'm actually surprised to an extent that we're at the $33 or so a barrel mark that we now see. So.
Yes, and the other thing that I find fascinating that I have not, to be honest, found the reason for this is the Brent crude price and the West Texas Intermediate price are now right there, very close together, where it wasn't that long ago that there was, $2, $3, $4, $5, $6 difference. And maybe that has to do with the fact that that the folks in the Permian Basin really are indeed shutting it down very, very quickly and very aggressively. So, and just, there's 2 things that shut down. One, drilling for new wells, and certainly the drilling rig count is, roughly half of what it was a few short months ago. But then there are the ability to temporarily shut in wells. Now, the Oil Conservation Commission in New Mexico, it's a commission and a division. So depending on whether you're making the rules or enforcing them, they hate that. They hate for you to shut them in. But in situations like this, they free up the rules, because if they don't, then instead of having a well temporarily shut in, a company's forced to permanently shut it in. So they're getting a little bit of more flexibility, which I think is perfectly appropriate in these times. But yeah, if you have a lot of wells in that kind of wait and see status and the price comes up, you could see some prices. What I'm saying is I do think volatility is the key. I think we're going to see swings in production and swings in price, certainly for the next year. And where, round and round it goes, and where it stops, nobody knows at this point. But I do think volatility is going to be the one thing I think that's almost guaranteed in the next 12 months.
Now, before we leave that topic, it's worth noting, while we've had some fun and disagreements with the land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, she's been reasonable throughout this entire process. There are ways for land commissioners to kind of attack the industry when they're on the floor, when they're already beaten down by keeping regulations and fees and all kinds of things intransigent, not waiving them. But she has been reasonable in relatively working with the industry to get through this very tough time. And ultimately, she is a steward of the money flowing into the state and its various funds. And kudos to her for at least recognizing that very important role and not trying to kick the industry when it's down.
Yeah, and then there are three main regulators in New Mexico. There's the Bureau of Land Management. A huge part of oil production is on BLM land. The State Land Office is the big one. That's the Land Grant Permanent Fund. There is some private acreage, and then the Oil Conservation Division kind of regulates the operations of the whole industry. But the point of it is there has been a lot of pressure to really kick the industry when it's down from the environmental community, and the State Land Office, for the acreage they control, I would tend to agree with you. That's not been the case. They could have done that, but that can be a mighty expensive endeavor. And if you look at what the charter of the State Land Office and the Commissioner of Public Lands is, it's to maximize the production of revenue for the benefit of the beneficiaries of that trust. And so you can't do that by kicking the people who are putting the money in when they're down. So, yeah, I'm with you. Good job on that. Rationality every now and then comes out to happen in a crisis, and that's a bright spot of rationality, I think, in the recent times.
We'll take it where we can get it.
We'll take it where we can get, exactly.
Now, onto a little more irrationality. WalletHub has a report. It came out on May the 19th, so it's almost a week old, but the study says states with the fewest and most coronavirus restrictions, and of course this is a moving target. Initially, New Mexico was in kind of the middle ground. Over time, more states have opened more quickly than New Mexico. So we have wound up now slipping all the way to 44th, meaning that we are stricter than all but a handful of states in terms of travel, in terms of businesses opening, in terms of all kinds of different ways that you experience a free and open economy, large gatherings, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So there's a lot to unpack here. I think WalletHub's report is as good as anybody's. I know the Wall Street Journal's had its own information put out. But just to give you an idea of who is most restrictive and least restrictive, on the least restrictive side, South Dakota, that's notably been, Kristi Noem has been a darling of many, including Rio Grande Foundation and others, for largely keeping South Dakota open. Large Native American population, similar to New Mexico, and of course dispersed population, but they have very few cases of COVID-19 and no restrictions relatively in their state economy. Now, you go down the list and there's a couple of states. Wisconsin, they suddenly became a very unrestricted state because a judge threw out
yeah, their whole program was thrown away.
So that's a Democratic governor that we wouldn't really give them any credit for being unrestricted. You look at the list of unrestricted states, and it is a list of red states. South Dakota, Wisconsin being the exception, but because of a judge. Idaho, Missouri, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, North Dakota, Iowa, Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, Arkansas. Finally, you get down to West Virginia, which is the reddest of blue states in terms of the governor. But Judge, the governor, he has done a relatively good job of keeping West Virginia, the Mountaineer state, open. And then you go to the flip side, and who are the most restricted states? Illinois, Rhode Island, D.C. is not a state, but they're in there, Massachusetts, Vermont, Hawaii, Washington, New Mexico, New York, Michigan, Connecticut, New Jersey, all of them blue. Delaware, and finally you get up to Ohio, and they're the first red state in terms of the highest amount of restrictions.
Right.
So it's there is a very good reason for this obvious disconnect we've got in terms of the openers and the closers, and the red states tend to be much more willing to be open, and the blue states tend to be much more closed, and it's a very, very significant real deal. And of course, our governor has kept New Mexico among the most closed states in the nation, not to the consternation of just many conservatives and Republicans, but a certain former Democratic governor in the Albuquerque Journal had some interesting remarks. But we'll that's a teaser. That's called
okay.
A teaser
that's a teaser for the next part of the second half of the podcast.
Well, I just want. Do you have any thoughts on the WalletHub report?
Well, though, first of all, you would say, who the heck's WalletHub? But they do a lot of surveys, and I would have to say objectively that they are tend to be quite good. There's always the issue about what questions you ask for every survey, but I think they have proven themselves to be a trustworthy source of survey type of data over time. And then I'm going to say something that I hate this phrase. I hate it. I'm going to say I hate it. When politicians say it, I want to throw up. So but it is true. And that is, correlation is not causation. And that's just a stupid way of saying. There's a better way of saying it. So statistics, things can be highly correlated. So why in general, and let's take away not New Mexico for a minute, why are the states that are very restrictive? Well, some states, New York comes to mind as the primary, New Jersey, they have their rates of infection and their rates of death are way higher. So the answer is, does it make sense for some of those states to do it? Also, some of these quote unquote blue states tend to be the most populated, and many of them are very densely populated. That would bring that to mind. But then when you get to a place like New Mexico, our rates of infection and our rates of death are relatively low. We have an urban center in Albuquerque, but we're not, Albuquerque is far from New York City or Chicago in terms of density, and huge parts of our state, basically 2 or 3 New England states away in terms of the size of New England states have almost none of it. And so that's where what's going on in New Mexico tends to really fall outside of the norm, because some of the things that would imply that maybe this is a better thing to do than otherwise, in terms of keeping things closed. But, the southern part of our state, there's still many counties that have 0 or no deaths, and they're faced with the same sort of closure, the same sort of rules that places that have some of the highest infection rates and some of the biggest problems in the country. So that's what I think makes New Mexico unique. And then the final thought I have is trying to run New Mexico, which geographically is immense, with a single strategy. That has been the overarching strategic management of this COVID-19 in New Mexico, when this is a huge state with lots of different issues, and and I sort of starting to see anecdotally, can overrun the policy within a state, particularly one not that populated, is if all the states around are open and people want to go to restaurants and they want to travel, they'll go to those other states, and we're already starting to see that happen. The Californians, particularly in Los Angeles, have come to Phoenix. They came to Phoenix for Memorial Day weekend by the thousands and thousands. And so that's the other issue New Mexico might have to do. So back to the statistics, absolutely agree. But I think we stand out even more being one of the most restrictive states, given the situation we find ourselves in.
Well, those are all great points. The WalletHub report, one of the many nice things about it is they have a chart showing the correlation, and this is an important correlation, not the sometimes correlation doesn't make any sense, but
right,
they're correlating death rate and the amount of restrictions. And really, you don't find a great deal of correlation. Interestingly enough, Hawaii, of all the U.S. states, Hawaii has fewer deaths per million than any state in the country, but they are also one of the top states in terms of restrictions. Now, you could say that's been a great success, but also you could say that it's unnecessary, and you would look at New Mexico, and WalletHub actually puts New Mexico at the high end in terms of infections. Now, we live here. We know that the infections and the deaths are predominantly in the northwest.
Yeah, it's a regional issue in New Mexico.
And also in some extended care and nursing homes. But we have a relatively high amount of deaths per million, 151, according to the worldometers.info coronavirus tracking site. For example, Arizona's at 110, Oklahoma's 79, Texas at 53, which our governors criticized a couple times Texas for opening up and for people for going to Texas. Utah's at 30. So I think, and these data are very questionable. There's been states like Colorado that pulled numbers down off the board, so to speak. And
well, and then some states are putting numbers up on the board, increasing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is going to be something for the statisticians, the data wonks, and a lot of people to work out in the future. But getting back to the regional aspect, our former governor, Bill Richardson, who I kind of liken to the Bill Clinton to Hillary Clinton in terms of New Mexico politics. He is the Bill Clinton to Michelle Lujan Grisham's Hillary. Of course, she got elected. Hillary, though, I think it's safe to say, to the left of Bill. Philosophically, Democratic Party shifted, of course. But Richardson, and obviously I don't agree with him on everything, wrote in the Sunday paper, in the newspaper Albuquerque Journal, he offered some suggestions. Now, he was trying to be nice. This is politics speak for, I'm trying to criticize somebody of my own political party, say they're overdoing it or doing something wrong without really being blatant. Now, I'm going to read this. As a start, leaders need to regionalize some of our response. Leaders, these metaphorical, metaphysical people out in the ether, right?
Yeah. Who might we be talking about? I'll get back to you. Let me think. I'll put my thinking cap on for that.
Exactly. So they need to regionalize the response. Southeast and Northeast New Mexico, with far fewer cases, can have their restrictions loosened sooner than Albuquerque, Santa Fe, San Juan, and McKinley. Our beleaguered restaurants should be allowed to gradually reopen with limited capacity and outdoor dining. Now, theoretically, the governor is going to do this on June the 1st, but this is his way of saying this should have been done maybe May 15th or May 1st or some other time. Elephant Butte, he goes on, which often draws over 100,000 people on a holiday weekend, should allow boating first, then the slow opening of the beaches. Another very thinly veiled but veiled critique of our governor. He offers a few other things. The governor and the legislature, these aren't so much critiques. Those were good, though. That's from Bill Richardson, not exactly a Republican critic of our governor. Draw from the severance tax permanent fund to give essentially a stimulus, infrastructure, etc., to the state. And we can debate and discuss that issue. We'll see if it's even proposed. Move forward with the space and aerospace economy, deal with tribes and give them more support, tap the land grant permanent fund. Presumably this is for preschool and everything else. Something near and dear to my heart, though, Bill Richardson says, don't raise taxes of any kind.
Wow.
So, Bill Richardson's unofficial signer of the Rio Grande Foundation Pledge.
We're going to give him an asterisk signing. I mean, am I overstating the case, Paul?
Oh, I think we might be able to accommodate him. Maybe we'll send him a nice little certificate in the mail. We'll find his address up there in Santa Fe. He even goes on to say, get rid of the onerous double Social Security tax, which we talked about during the legislative session, which the legislature talked about during the session. Now he does go, say Republicans need to leave the film credits alone, blah, blah, blah. And very interesting stuff, though, from our former governor, Bill Richardson.
Yeah, the only thing I think this editorial didn't have was a catchphrase. My two favorite are, with all due respect. Usually when people say that, they mean, I have no respect for what you're doing at all. Or the Southern version of that is, well, bless your heart. You're trying really hard. I do think it's interesting that he did this, and one thing you can say a lot of things good, bad, or indifferent about former Governor Bill Richardson. The man's a politician, and so he didn't have to do this. No one made him do it. There's not a gun to his head. He chose to do it for whatever reasons, either his great love for New Mexico or just wanting to get his name in the paper. Our listeners can decide, but he did make some points that I find myself uncomfortable in the number of agreements. It's like, yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh, he's the voice of reason in New Mexico now. I would have not expected that. So,
well, love him, hate him, or whatever in between. And, I will say very clearly, again, Bill Richardson, definitely to the right of Michelle Lujan Grisham politically. Right. Pro-gun, endorsed by the NRA multiple times. He also passed some of he and the Democrats in the legislature got through some of the biggest tax cuts that we've seen in many years in New Mexico. And when the Democrats talk about raising taxes or eliminating past tax cuts, they're really talking about him.
Now they focus on Governor Martinez, but what she did relative to Richardson was just a small sliver. So.
Right. Yeah. It's politics, but Governor Martinez had many cuts. I think the number is something like 69 or 70 cuts, but her tax cuts were a tiny fraction of the size of what Bill Richardson did. Now, this is not the Bill Richardson praise hour at the Tipping Point podcast.
It's as close as I ever thought it would be.
As close as we'll get. The spaceport remains a boondoggle. Maybe someday it'll launch, but I'm going to note right now that Elon Musk is supposedly sending manned a human mission to the International Space Station on behalf of NASA later this week. So he is light years away above where we are in New Mexico. Film subsidies remain a boondoggle. I will say one thing further, and this kind of unfortunately is a delineation of the parties, because the Albuquerque Journal gave Bill Richardson, a Democrat, and Gary Carruthers, a Republican, an opportunity to address the issues. Richardson, agree or disagree, made some very cogent points about very important policy issues. Gary Carruthers had an opportunity to reinforce the message of conservatives, Republicans, his own party, push back against what the governor's doing. And I don't think he really even approached the plate, let alone swing and missed. And it's just sad. Now, Gary Carruthers, I don't think anyone would ever have called him a philosophical conservative. He's a lovely human being. Met him down in New Mexico State a few times. Fine guy. But when it comes to conservative policies in New Mexico, we didn't really even have fiscal conservatives until Gary Johnson.
Right.
Now, obviously, he's more of a libertarian philosophically, so he's not a social conservative. Susana Martinez, also very fiscally conservative, more so than Johnson. We could question how socially conservative she is. Certainly a law enforcement conservative, but really the advent of conservative Republican governance in New Mexico didn't even get started until 1992 when Johnson got elected, because Carruthers is not a conservative.
Right. Well, and the fact that how many of the points of the second op-ed did we talk about? None. So I mean, just in terms of setting the agenda in the journal, no question that Bill Richardson did that, at least for this round. So
we are going to move forward to talk about the pledge, because we have discussed it here with the Bill Richardson piece, and his calling against tax increases, which kudos to him. But the Rio Grande Foundation has been out collecting names of various politicians running for the legislature, whether they're sitting legislators or whether they are people who just have primaries and are challenging each other. So a short list, and I know we only have a few minutes to go, but here are the races, both Republican and Democrat, where there are primaries with philosophical differences on the no tax increase pledge.
All right.
Senate District 19, that is the easy and obvious one. Incumbent Jim White did not pledge to not raise taxes. Greg Schmiedes, a representative in the East Mountains running to challenge White, did take the pledge, and we've made note of Greg Schmiedes' conservative chops elsewhere, but he is definitely philosophically a much more conservative person, economically, socially, all manner of things than Jim White. Senate District 20, this is let's see. This is Payne, Greg
Yeah,
Payne's race.
Admiral Payne's former
Yes.
seat.
And Payne, I'll just say he was extremely squishy Republican. Another lovely man. But John Morton signed the pledge. Corinne Foster did not in that district, these in Republicans. Senate District 39, and I believe this is the Senate district that Greg Baca had at one point that goes some ungodly Senate district from just south of Santa Fe all the way down to Lincoln County. So just
it's one of those gerrymandered beyond belief districts.
Joey Tiano, Tiano, signed. Susan Vescovo did not. And again, primary elections are going on. I've early voted. I don't know. Did you do a absentee? Or?
No, I've got to vote. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I did it on a Saturday morning in person, right by my house. I was the only voting member of the population there. There were plenty of folks there. Interestingly enough, Democrats, we've seen a few signatories as well. House District 17, Laura Lucero y Ruiz did sign the pledge. De Gutierrez, sorry. Laura Lucero y Ruiz de Gutierrez. That's a mouthful, but she is running against Debbie Armstrong, who did not sign the pledge. So that's a Democratic primary there in House District 17. House District 40, Matthew Gonzalez running for the legislature. This is Cimarron area, northern New Mexico. Roger Montoya did not. So pretty even distribution. I'm happy that we saw some ideological and party line differentiation. We have Democrats willing to step up and say that they are not going to raise taxes. So
and
not just Bill Richardson.
That was my point. Not just Bill Richardson is a Democrat who says raising taxes is a bad idea. So very good.
Yeah, and you can keep that in mind. Of course, it's errorsoфenchantment.com, so you can check those out as you head to the primary polling places. And yeah, we would have loved to have gotten this information out earlier, but we've been very, very busy as this whole crisis situation has been going on. Wally, one last story that's worth talking about here, and I think this one may be the most... we talked about that doctor a few weeks ago who said, opening New Mexico now would be horrible idea. He encouraged the governor to go to June 15th. Now, this is from the Santa Fe New Mexican. It got picked up by the Associated Press, but it's May the 23rd. New Mexico tourism chief, it could be a year or 18 months before, quote, mass gatherings, that is 100 people or more, resume.
Which is Spanish Market, Indian Market, all of the tourism and art tourism events of Santa Fe.
It's Balloon Fiesta, it's State Fair, it's
everything. It's a lot of
large weddings. I mean, 100 people at a wedding is trivial.
Is it Lobo UNM Lobo basketball?
Lobo basketball, high school football. I mean, again, they make the same point. This is the tourism secretary, but it does note in the article the governor's office concurred, and it's saying essentially that until we have the vaccine, we can't simply have any of these kinds of events as a state. And I hate to say, I mean, it really, this goes beyond the economics. This goes to the heart of being human beings. It goes to the heart of us as a state of New Mexico. And this is the kind of stuff that scares the HE double hockey sticks out of me. Because 18 months, I mean, you do the numbers, you're talking about not just Balloon Fiesta this year, you're talking about Balloon Fiesta next year.
Right.
And does that kind of event ever get going again? And I mean, you talk about what New Mexico is known for. Yes, Breaking Bad is a big one. But in terms of complementary things that people actually want to experience and come to our city and our state to experience, I'm sorry, Breaking Bad has a lovely tour. It's an interesting thing to check out. But the Balloon Fiesta is far and above anything else about Albuquerque in terms of its international recognition.
Yeah, without a doubt. 18 months, as they say, is a long, long time to wait for anything.
Yeah, and I this really gets to the heart of what we talked about at the very beginning as an issue of Are we going to, as the governor says, wait for the virus to determine how we open, or are we going to be independent thinking human beings and get about doing our day-to-day lives, regardless of some marginal safety issues? Yes, take precautions. And I realize there are challenges. The balloon fiesta, it's one thing. You can socially distance fairly well. I've been there on traditional balloon fiesta mornings on the field. Unless you want to go talk to somebody and really get together with them, it's not a problem socially distancing. Being in the balloon, different story.
Yes.
But, those are questions we're going to have a lot of discussion on, Wally. So anyway, thank you all for listening to this week's podcast. We are available on iTunes, Stitcher, and all the other podcasting websites and softwares. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show. We'll see you next week.